I'd just like to take you back to the early 1800s, a point in time we refer to as the Industrial Revolution. And at that point in time, we created machines that made production much faster. Unfortunately, those machines were inherently dangerous. And so what we found was a lot of people lost their lives working on those machines, and many more became seriously physically injured. It then fell to the government of the day to make laws about making machines safer. They also made laws to make the people safer. One of the laws they brought in was the Factories Act in 1819 that said, we're going to set a limit. That limit is the number of hours a child, somebody as young as 4, can work in a single day. The limit was 12 hours. Some people, predominantly the factory owners, thought the limit was too low. Many thought the limit was okay, and then there were indeed more people that thought perhaps the limit was too high and it ought to be reduced. So let's fast forward 100 years. We now find ourselves at the beginning of the 1900s, the evolution of the motor car, a machine that made transport faster. Like its predecessors, that machine was dangerous. A lot of people died. A lot of people became seriously, permanently injured. It fell to the government of the day to make laws. Those laws made the machines safer. They also made laws to make people safer. One of those was to set a limit, a speed limit. Some think the speed limit's too low. Others think it's fair and reasonable. And indeed more think that it's too high and that it ought to come down. Move on another 100 years, and with the benefit of hindsight and a panel of experts, tonight we're going to look at speed, particularly low-level speeding, and the impact that that can have on us as individuals and on the broader community. Each of our guests has a myth to discuss, and hopefully you will have the myth dispelled through the scientific information that they will share with you. My first guest is Dr. Jeremy Woolley. He is a Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Automotive Safety Research at the Adelaide University. His research includes in-depth crash analysis, road safety analysis and road design. He tells me to put it simply, he's been investigating speed for years. Jeremy has a myth: travelling 65 kilometres an hour in a 60 kilometre an hour zone increases your risk of involvement in a casualty accident by how much? So would you like to pick up your clicker pads for me, please? Have a look at the numbers that are there. When the clock appears, please pick the number that best represents your answer. And the answer to that is, well, Jeremy, is going over a little bit risky?
It is risky, and the responses there are quite common, and that is because the risks associated with travelling speed are not entirely intuitive. And there's very good reasons why it's not necessarily intuitive. Many people spend many years of their lives driving. Most of the population engages in driving as an activity, and many of us, for whatever reasons, sometimes accidentally go over the limit. Some people deliberately go over the limit, but they live to tell the tale. They don't get involved in a casualty crash. They don't even receive a ticket in the mail for speeding. So over a lifetime, they build up a strong belief that there is no risk associated with travelling above the speed limit.
So what changes then as we go that extra 5 kilometres an hour over the speed limit?
Basically, it's an appreciation of the magnitude of risk, I think, which is what people have the most problems with. We know, and most people can relate to the idea that someone travelling well in excess of the speed limit, say 30 to 40 k above the speed limit, is putting themselves and other road users at extreme levels of risk, and that's very much the case. But that's not the complete picture in road safety, and in fact it's the bulk of the drivers out there, the bulk of the population, who are travelling just above the speed limit, who make up the broader exposure. And that, combined with the lesser risks in travelling at 40 above the speed limit, results in a big road safety problem for us.
Okay, well, if I was on the road for a long period of time, obviously I'm exposed to a level of risk. If I can shorten that time down by, well, travelling faster, surely I'm safer.
The actual length of time you cut off your journey, relatively speaking, is quite small in comparison. So those arguments really miss a point in terms of where the balance of the influence is, and certainly in relation to risks.
So what is your investigation into crash outcomes and certainly crash effect as a result of low-level speeding? Is there something we can draw from that?
There certainly is, and I'll outline how we understand the risks associated with speed. So a study was conducted several years ago by the Road Accident Research Unit at the Uni of Adelaide, so it was conducted here in Adelaide, and it was what we call a case control study. Now in this case we looked at people who are involved in crashes and compared those to people who were not involved in crashes. And it's through that comparison we're able to come up with a risk curve, which we can now show now.
Well, surely a little bit over only means a little bit of risk, doesn't it?
Well, it's all relative, and as we can see from this risk curve, just travelling 5 kilometres per hour over the speed limit, and in this case it's a relative risk curve, which means we're showing the risk relative to travelling at 60 kilometres per hour in an urban area with a 60k limit. And we can see for approximately each 5 kilometre per hour increase in speed over the speed limit, we're effectively doubling our crash risk. So there's very much an exponential relationship that exists there. We managed to replicate this for rural areas as well, and we found much the same effects. What we found was that again it's similar to an exponential curve, and the risk again escalated with increasing speeds over the speed limit. Now, as I was saying earlier, most people relate to the fact that if you drive at extreme speeds, you're putting yourself and other road users at a very high level of risk. But what they don't appreciate is even just small amounts over the speed limit still carries with itself a proportion of risk, and most people underestimate what that proportion of risk is.
So is there any correlation? I mean, obviously things like drink driving and so forth are quite common areas. We get a lot of media about that, but we don't get quite as much about low-level speed. Is there some correlation there?
You can see that when we overlay the risk of driving with a certain blood alcohol concentration, it correlates quite well to the travelling speed risk curves in metropolitan areas. So for example, driving with a blood alcohol concentration of 0.05, which most people would be quite familiar with because that's a legal limit, is equivalent to travelling at 5 kilometres per hour over the speed limit in a 60 zone. So the risks are equivalent, and it's quite interesting when you look at the debate in society and the societal approach to this. When it comes to drink driving, you very rarely hear cries of revenue raising or us being draconian or too harsh on the offenders. Yet when it comes to people who are travelling at 65k over the speed limit, there's a lot of debate in the media and misrepresentation of the facts, basically. And so have we looked at sort of changes in speed and what effects that might have had? There are the speed-risk relationship is now very robust, and it has been well established all over the world. If we go to the next slide, we can actually show an example from here in Adelaide. But we can see this is a chart showing the change in casualty crashes that happened when we adopted a default urban speed limit dropping from 60 kilometres an hour to 50 kilometres an hour. We can see that there's virtually a step change in the number of casualty crashes that were occurring. Now, we see this pattern again and again whenever we change speed limits. Throughout Australia now, we have several instances where we've changed the speed limit on rural roads, for example, from 110 to 100. And we see, we do observe reductions in casualty crashes on those roads as well. So it's a very robust relationship. But when we think back to the risk curve and that question of low-level speeding, the examples I gave earlier of someone travelling at extreme levels above the speed limit, those instances are few and far between in comparison to the massive drivers who might be creeping just slightly above the speed limit. So cumulatively, the exposure is with those massive drivers, and that combined by that risk that exists even at that low level of 5 kilometres above the speed limit results in our biggest part of the road safety problem. So therefore, speed management is a key part of handling the road safety problem.
Oh, great. Well, I'm pleased we heard that. Are there questions from the audience, perhaps?
And my question is, why do we allow alcohol at all in your blood? When you relate that to a speed, if you're saying a 0.05 at 65 is relevant to 65 kilometres an hour, then why do we allow alcohol content in your blood at all.
And well, that's actually a very good argument, and an argument that's picking up a bit of momentum internationally at the moment. And there's many advocates of actually adopting a zero tolerance to alcohol whilst driving, in the same way that we expect high standards like that in the aviation, rail and heavy vehicle industry. So that argument is floating around at the moment, and there's a bit of debate occurring with it.
All right, well, I think we have a question up the top there as well.
Thank you. On this graph that's on display at the moment showing the results of reduction in speed limit from 60 to 50 kilometres an hour, there's a word there that says 2.3 kilometres an hour speed reduction. Is that what was actually measured as a result of changing the limit by 10 kilometres an hour, that people only slowed down by 2.3?
Yes, what that 2.3 actually represents is the reduction in mean speeds, so measured across the entire population of monitored drivers. So if you think of the classic sort of bell-shaped curve and the speed distribution there, the mean speed is actually that measure which we're quoting is being reduced there. There are measures which exist like 85th percentile and so on, but what we often observe is that you don't get 100% compliance, of course, and people are sitting just above the speed limit. I think most of you intuitively know that the police allow some margin of error perhaps in their enforcement. So people do tend to sit at a speed they feel comfortable at above the speed limit as well. So you don't expect a sudden 10 kilometre per hour drop in speed when you introduce a new limit. But what we do observe from all our studies is that over time, over the period of it could be many years, the benefits do slowly increase incrementally as time goes on.
All right, well, thank you very much for that question. We do need to move on, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Jeremy Woolley.